The night was bitterly cold, the kind of Chicago winter that gnawed at the bones and made even the most resilient city dwellers rush home without a second glance at the world around them. Snowflakes swirled in the dim glow of the streetlights, the icy wind howling between the towering buildings. Jake Miller shoved his hands deep into his worn-out jacket pockets, his breath forming small clouds in the air. His shift at the diner had been brutal, the tips dismal, and his stomach growled in protest. But there was nothing to do about it. Rent was due, Lily needed groceries, and he had just enough left to make it through the week. If he stretched it, Dot. Then he saw him, a hunched figure barely visible against the snowy sidewalk, collapsed near the curb. People walked past, their gazes fixed ahead, their scarves pulled up high, pretending they didn't see. Jake hesitated only for a second before rushing over, dropping to his knees beside the old man. His frail body trembled, his breath shallow. He looked up at Jake with glassy, unfocused eyes, his thin lips parting slightly, as if trying to say something. "Hey, stay with me," Jake said, shaking the man's shoulder gently. His skin was like paper, so fragile, Jake was afraid he might break him. Dot. With numb fingers, he fumbled for his phone and called 911, his voice sharp with urgency. He didn't leave the man's side, speaking to him, reassuring him, though he wasn't sure if he even heard. Minutes stretched like hours until flashing red and blue lights reflected off the icy pavement. The paramedics worked quickly, lifting the man onto the gurney, checking his vitals. As they prepared to leave, one of them looked at Jake. "You saved his life," she said simply. "If he'd been out here much longer, he wouldn't have made it." Jake nodded, rubbing his hands together, trying to chase away the cold. He didn't think of himself as a hero. It was just the right thing to do. A month passed. The incident faded into the background of Jake's daily struggles. He had more pressing things to worry about: paying bills, keeping Lily fed, and dealing with Marcus's constant lectures about how he needed to figure his life out. Then, one evening, a sharp knock at the door jolted him out of his exhausted haze. Dot opening it, he was met with the sight of a sharply dressed man, his suit pristine, his eyes assessing. "Jake Miller?" "Yeah." "Who's asking?" The man extended a hand. "Richard Evans. I'm a lawyer. May I come in?" Jake's stomach twisted. A lawyer? That could never mean anything good. He stepped aside warily, letting Evans into his cramped apartment. The man looked around briefly before pulling a solemn black folder from his briefcase and handing it to Jake. "This is regarding the estate of Mr. Henry Lancaster." Jake blinked. The name tickled at the edges of his memory. Where had he... The old man. His throat went dry. "Wait, the guy Evans nodded. "Yes, Mr. Lancaster passed away recently. Before he did, he made some final amendments to his will. You were included." Jake's hands trembled as he opened the folder. A sealed letter, neatly folded documents, and then a set of keys. What is this?" Evans gave him a small smile. "A house, Mr. Miller, and a financial gift. Mr. Lancaster wanted to ensure that your kindness did not go unrewarded." Jake sat down hard, the room spinning. This had to be a mistake, a dream, some kind of elaborate joke. Dot. But the weight of the keys in his hand told him otherwise. He had gone from scraping by, barely surviving, to owning something real, something permanent. And all because, one cold night, he had stopped. Jake barely registered the rest of the conversation with Evans. The words house and financial gift echoed in his mind, each repetition making the situation feel more surreal. When the lawyer left, leaving him with the documents, the letter, and the keys, Jake just sat there, staring at them. His entire life had been a constant struggle, scraping by, barely making rent, stretching every dollar until it tore. And now, this? The first thing he did was call Marcus. His best friend had always been the practical one, the skeptic, the guy who saw scams and pitfalls in every corner of life. "You sure this ain't some elaborate con?" Marcus asked when Jake explained everything. It was a real lawyer, Marcus. He had all the paperwork. "There's a house, a damn house." "A house in what condition, though?" Marcus snorted. "Watch, it's probably falling apart, full of termites, haunted by ghosts of bad investments." Jake didn't care. He needed to see it for himself. The next morning, he stood in front of the address printed on the documents. He had expected something modest, maybe a rundown fixer-upper in a forgotten part of the city. What he found instead was a charming 2-story home in a quiet neighborhood, the kind of place with tree-lined streets and people who actually waved at their neighbors. The house itself had white shutters, a wraparound porch, and a driveway that looked like it had been freshly paved. Dot. This couldn't be real, Dot. His hands shook as he fit the key into the lock. The door swung open smoothly, revealing a space that was perfect. It wasn't some forgotten, crumbling shack. It was fully furnished, warm, and inviting, like someone had prepared it just for him. The furniture was tasteful but not extravagant, the kitchen gleamed with stainless steel appliances, and the living room had a massive bookshelf packed with titles from every genre. It wasn't just a house, Dot. It was a home, Dot. On the polished wooden coffee table sat another envelope with his name on it. His heart pounded as he picked it up, recognizing the same shaky handwriting from the first letter Evans had given him. Jake, if you're reading this, then I'm gone. I don't know if we would have ever met again otherwise, but that night when you stopped to help me, it meant more than you know. Not because you saved my life, though you did, but because you reminded me of something I had long forgotten. Kindness, without expectation. I've lived a life full of deals, contracts, and people who always wanted something. That night, you didn't know who I was, and yet you stayed, Dot. This house was my late wife's favorite place. She filled it with love, laughter, and books. So many books. I lost her years ago, and with her, I lost the warmth this home once held. It deserves to be lived in again. I hope it gives you what you need. A fresh start. A place to breathe. A future. Henry. Jake sat down hard on the couch, pressing the letter against his knee. He didn't know this man. Not really. And yet, somehow, Henry Lancaster had changed his life forever. Dot. But what did he do with this now? How did someone who had spent his whole life barely scraping by suddenly learn how to have something? To keep it? One thing was certain, this was only the beginning. Dot. For the next few days, Jake moved through life in a daze. He went to work at the diner like nothing had changed, flipping burgers and refilling coffee cups, all while knowing he had the keys to a house in his pocket. His boss barked at him for zoning out, and Marcus kept calling with the same skeptical questions. You sure there ain't some hidden clause? Like, you gotta fight off a long-lost heir in a gladiator match or something? Jake laughed, but deep down, he couldn't shake the paranoia. This was too good, too easy. His whole life had been a series of struggles. Why would it suddenly change now? But the house was real, the money was real, and for the first time in years, he wasn't worried about rent. Dot. He took his sister, Lily, to see the place a few days later. She was 17, still in high school, but she had carried the same weight of their hardships on her shoulders. She had learned too early how to stretch a meal, how to pretend she didn't need new clothes, how to smile when the electricity got shut off. Jake had promised her a better future, but he had never been sure how he'd make it happen. Dot. When she stepped inside the house, her eyes went wide. Jake, her voice was barely above a whisper. This is yours? Ours, he corrected, watching her take in the living room, the big windows, the open kitchen. You can finally have your own room. She turned to him, eyes already glassy with emotion. I don't get it. Why would some random old man do this for you? Jake swallowed, running a hand through his hair. I don't know. He really didn't. But it's ours now. Lily explored the house like a kid in a dream, running her fingers over the bookshelves, opening closets, testing the stairs. Meanwhile, Jake sat in the kitchen, staring at the sleek countertops and the untouched appliances. It felt like stepping into someone else's life. Dot. That night, he stayed in the house for the first time, alone. He lay awake in the dark, listening to the creaks of the wooden floors, the quiet hum of the fridge, the wind outside rattling the windows. He should have felt relieved, at peace. Instead, a gnawing unease settled in his chest. Dot. It was the letter. I've lived a life full of deals, contracts, and people who always wanted something. Henry Lancaster had been a billionaire, a man surrounded by power, money, influence. And yet, he had died alone, collapsed on a frozen sidewalk, with no one but Jake to help him. That didn't sit right. How did a man like that have no one? No family? No friends? Jake got out of bed and found the folder the lawyer had given him. He flipped through the documents, looking for anything that might explain more about Henry's life. His assets, his legal papers, his properties. And then he found something strange, a second will. Dated just a few weeks before the night Jake found him. And in it, there was a name scratched out, as if someone, Henry himself or someone else, had changed their mind about who would inherit everything. Jake's stomach twisted. Someone else was supposed to get this house. And they weren't going to be happy that they didn't. Jake stared at the scratched out name, his pulse hammering in his ears. Someone had been meant to inherit this house. Someone who, at the last moment, had been erased from Henry Lancaster's will. Why? A cold unease settled in his gut. He knew nothing about this man beyond a name and a generous letter. What if Henry hadn't just been some lonely old billionaire? What if there were complications, family, rivals, people who wouldn't take kindly to Jake stepping into something that wasn't originally meant for him? He needed answers. The next morning, he found himself outside the lawyer's office, gripping the folder of documents like a lifeline. When he walked in, Richard Evans greeted him with his usual composed demeanor, but Jake could see the flicker of surprise in his eyes. "Mr. Miller," Evans said smoothly, motioning for him to sit. "What can I do for you?" Jake set the folder on the polished desk and flipped it open, jabbing a finger at the will. "I found this, the original document, before Henry changed it." He looked up, his throat dry. "Who was supposed to get this house before me?" Evans hesitated, a beat too long. Then he exhaled through his nose and leaned back. "I was hoping you wouldn't ask that." Jake's stomach twisted. "Why?" "Because it complicates things." Evans laced his fingers together, choosing his words carefully. The person who was originally named in the will was Henry's nephew, a man named Charles Lancaster. Jake didn't like the way Evans said the name, like it carried weight, like it mattered. And why was he removed? Evans sighed. Because Henry didn't trust him. Charles had always been after his money, pushing for power, manipulating, making bad investments under Henry's name. Henry finally had enough. He rewrote the will, cutting him out entirely, but I doubt Charles took it well. Jake's mouth went dry. "Does he know?" Evans hesitated again. "Not yet. The official reading of the will is tomorrow. Charles will find out then." Tomorrow. Jake swallowed hard. He had just barely begun to accept this house, this unexpected turn in his life, and now he was being pulled into something much bigger. Because one thing was certain, a man like Charles Lancaster wasn't going to just accept being cut out of a billionaire's will. And when he found out that a nobody like Jake had taken his place, there was no telling what he might do. The next 24 hours felt like waiting for a storm to hit. Jake tried to go about his day, but the unease sat in his stomach like a stone. He couldn't shake the feeling that, at any moment, his luck would come crashing down. That evening, he sat in the kitchen of his house, staring at the polished countertops, the pristine floors, the expensive furniture that still didn't feel like it belonged to him. Tomorrow, Charles Lancaster would find out that everything he expected, everything he believed he was entitled to, had gone to a broke kid with nothing to his name. Jake didn't know the man, but he could guess the kind of person he was: rich, entitled, dangerous. He barely slept. Every sound in the house made him jump. The creak of the floorboards, the rustling of tree branches outside, even the hum of the refrigerator. By morning, his nerves were raw. And then, at exactly 9:17 a.m., the knock came. Hard. Aggressive. Jake's pulse spiked. He froze, staring at the door, gripping the edge of the table. "It's him!" The knock came again. Louder. For a split second, Jake considered not answering, pretending he wasn't home. But he knew that wouldn't make a difference. Slowly, he stood, walked to the door, and pulled it open. A man stood on the doorstep, tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in an expensive black suit that fit him like a second skin. Dark blonde hair slicked back, sharp, angular features, cold, calculating blue eyes that locked onto Jake with an intensity that made his breath hitch. Charles Lancaster. Jake barely had time to react before Charles stepped forward, forcing him back a step. "You must be Jake Miller," Charles said, voice smooth but edged with something sharp. "The lucky nobody who inherited my house." Jake forced himself to stand his ground, gripping the doorframe, as Charles Lancaster stepped inside like he owned the place. There was something about the man, an aura of control, a quiet arrogance that made Jake's stomach knot. "This is my house now," Jake said, his voice steadier than he felt. Charles let out a slow, amused breath, scanning the room like he was appraising something cheap. "Is that what Evans told you? That this little act of charity was all above board?" He turned, eyes locking onto Jake's. "Tell me something. Did Henry ever actually say he was giving you this house?" Jake hesitated. Not directly, but Charles clicked his tongue. That's what I thought. He took a step closer, and Jake caught a faint scent of expensive cologne, the kind that smelled like power and old money. You have no idea what you've walked into, do you? Jake's jaw tightened. I saved his life. I didn't ask for this. Charles smiled, but there was nothing friendly about it. And yet you took it, without question. He tilted his head, studying Jake like he was some strange creature he'd just found under his shoe. Tell me, Jake, what do you really think happened that night? Do you honestly believe my uncle just collapsed on the street? That it was a coincidence you happened to be there? Jake's pulse kicked up. What are you saying? Charles leaned in slightly, voice lower now. I'm saying my uncle had a lot of enemies, and I don't believe in coincidences. The room felt colder. Jake swallowed hard. You think someone wanted him dead? Charles's expression didn't change, but his silence was answer enough. And then he took a step back, adjusting the cuff of his suit jacket like this was just a casual chat. Enjoy the house while you can, Jake, because I promise you, this isn't over. With that, he turned and walked out the door, leaving Jake standing there, heart pounding, dread creeping up his spine. Because Charles Lancaster wasn't just angry. He was hunting for something. And Jake had a sinking feeling that he was now caught in the middle of something far bigger and far more dangerous than he had ever imagined. Jake locked the door the second Charles disappeared down the street, his fingers trembling against the deadbolt. His mind was racing. What the hell did I just get myself into? He turned back toward the house, scanning the space with fresh eyes. The pristine walls, the untouched furniture, everything felt different now, tainted by Charles's words. Do you honestly believe my uncle just collapsed on the street? Until now, Jake had thought of Henry Lancaster as just another old man, frail and forgotten. But what if he wasn't? What if he'd been running from something? Or worse, what if someone had helped him collapse that night? Jake needed answers. He pulled out his phone and did something he should have done weeks ago. He started digging. Henry Lancaster's name pulled up thousands of articles, most of them about his business empire, his wealth, his philanthropy. But as Jake scrolled deeper, past the glowing obituaries and tributes, something else started to emerge. Scandals, lawsuits, accusations of corporate sabotage. And then, an article that made Jake's blood run cold. Billionaire Henry Lancaster narrowly avoids accidental poisoning at private dinner. The article was dated 2 weeks before Jake found him on the street. Jake sat back, his pulse hammering in his ears. Poisoning? That wasn't something that just happened. Someone had tried to kill him, and not long after, he'd collapsed in the middle of the city, alone, no security, no family. Had Henry known he was in danger? Had he been running from someone? And if so, had Jake just inherited more than a house? Had he inherited a target on his back? A knock at the door made him jump so hard his phone nearly slipped from his hand. Not Charles. Again. Jake moved toward the door cautiously, peering through the peephole. A woman stood on the porch, mid-30s, sharp features, dark hair pulled into a tight bun. She wore a navy blue blazer, polished and professional, and she was looking straight into the peephole. Jake hesitated before opening the door just a crack. Yeah? The woman didn't waste time. You need to come with me. Now. Jake blinked. Excuse me? She pulled out a badge. FBI? Jake's stomach dropped. We need to talk about Henry Lancaster, she said, and about the people who don't want you living in this house. Jake's mouth went dry. The FBI? He had no idea what to say. Every instinct told him to slam the door and pretend this wasn't happening. But the woman, Agent Carter, according to the badge, looked completely unfazed, like she had already anticipated his hesitation. Mr. Miller, I suggest you come with me now, before someone else comes knocking, she said, her voice calm but firm. Jake hesitated for half a second longer, then grabbed his jacket and stepped outside, locking the door behind him. His heart was hammering in his chest. The black government-issued SUV parked at the curb sent a chill down his spine. This wasn't some minor misunderstanding. This was serious. Agent Carter drove in silence for the first few minutes, eyes focused on the road. Jake kept glancing at her, waiting for an explanation, but she didn't offer one. Finally, he couldn't take it anymore. Are you going to tell me what's going on, or am I supposed to just sit here and guess? She exhaled sharply. How much do you know about Henry Lancaster? Jake frowned. He was a billionaire, had a lot of enemies apparently. Someone tried to poison him a couple of weeks before I found him. And now his nephew is acting like I stole his birthright. Carter shot him a look. You did more research than I expected. Jake let out a humorless laugh. Yeah, well, it turns out inheriting a dead man's house comes with a lot of baggage. Carter's grip on the wheel tightened slightly. It's worse than you think, Jake. He stiffened. How much worse? She took a slow breath, like she was debating how much to tell him. Then, Henry Lancaster didn't just have enemies. He had secrets. And the people who wanted him dead? They think you have something they want. Jake felt a cold weight settle in his stomach. What the hell are you talking about? Carter pulled the SUV into an underground parking garage, shut off the engine, and turned to face him fully. Before he died, Henry Lancaster was working with us, she said. We were building a case against some very powerful people. People who wanted him silenced. Jake stared at her, trying to process what she was saying. And now they think What? That I have whatever evidence he was collecting? Carter nodded. We don't know if he left it in the house or if he gave it to you in some other way. But what we do know is that Charles Lancaster isn't the only one watching you. Jake's pulse was pounding now. If these people think I have something, what happens when they realize I don't? Carter's expression darkened. Then they'll stop looking. Jake swallowed hard. He didn't need her to spell it out. If these people were willing to kill Henry Lancaster, a billionaire with resources and security, what chance did he have? For the first time since this whole nightmare started, Jake wished he had just walked past that old man on the sidewalk. Jake sat frozen in his seat, every muscle in his body locked tight. The reality of his situation was hitting him like a freight train. He had inherited more than just a house. He had inherited a deadly game he hadn't even known he was playing. You need to tell me everything Henry gave you, Carter said, her voice level but urgent. Letters, documents, a USB drive, anything out of the ordinary, even if you don't think it's important. Jake ran a hand through his hair, trying to think. He left me a letter, just some sentimental stuff about how I helped him. No codes, no hidden messages. And Evans, his lawyer, gave me the keys to the house and the deed. That's it. Carter studied him for a moment, then reached into a folder on the dashboard and pulled out a photo. She handed it to him. It was a grainy security camera still. Henry Lancaster, sitting at a cafe table. Across from him sat another man, tall, with sharp features and slicked back hair. Recognize him? Carter asked. Jake shook his head. No, should I? His name is Victor Moretti, runs an international security firm. Officially, he's just a businessman. Unofficially, he's an enforcer for some of the most powerful criminals in the world. Jake felt another jolt of fear shoot through him. And you think he had something to do with Henry's death? Carter nodded. Moretti was seen with Henry multiple times in the weeks leading up to his collapse. Then suddenly, Henry goes off the grid. No security, no entourage, and ends up half dead on the street. Now you have his house, and we have reason to believe Moretti thinks whatever Henry was hiding is somewhere in there. Jake exhaled sharply. So what do we do? Carter's eyes flickered toward the parking garage entrance, like she was double-checking they were still alone. You let us search the house, she said. If there's something hidden there, we need to find it before Moretti's people do. Jake hesitated. The house might have been a gift, but it still felt like his. Letting the FBI tear through it wasn't exactly an easy pill to swallow. But then he thought about Charles and Moretti, and the very real possibility that someone was willing to kill him over this. Fine, he said, his voice quiet but firm. Let's do it. Carter gave him a tight nod and started the engine again. As they pulled out of the garage, Jake couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. The drive back to the house was tense. Jake kept glancing in the side mirror, half expecting to see a black SUV tailing them, but the streets were empty. That didn't ease the knot in his stomach. Carter was focused, gripping the wheel tightly. Once we get inside, don't touch anything until my team arrives. If Henry left something hidden, I don't want you setting off any alarms, literal or otherwise. Jake swallowed hard. Literal alarms? Moretti's men aren't amateurs, she said. If they think Henry hid something in that house, they could have already planted surveillance. Bugs, cameras, maybe worse. Jake felt a cold sweat form at the back of his neck. The idea that someone, criminals, could have been inside his house, watching him, sent a sick feeling through his gut. When they pulled up to the curb, everything looked normal. No suspicious cars, no shadowy figures lurking in the distance. But that didn't mean anything. Carter stepped out first, scanning the area. Then she motioned for Jake to follow Dot. The second he unlocked the front door and stepped inside, he felt it. A shift in the air. Something was off. Carter must have sensed it too, because she raised a hand, signaling for him to stay put. She reached into her jacket, pulling out a small device, a scanner of some kind. Slowly, she moved through the entryway, sweeping it over the walls, the furniture, the ceiling. Then it beeped. Jake's breath caught. Carter followed the signal to a lamp in the corner of the living room. She crouched down, lifted the shade, and found it. A tiny black device tucked near the base. A camera. Jake's stomach turned. "Someone's been watching you," she murmured. Before he could even process that, the scanner beeped again. This time, near the bookshelf, another device. And then, near the kitchen counter. The realization hit like a hammer. They hadn't just been watching him. They had been listening too. Jake felt exposed, violated. He had been living here, eating, sleeping, completely unaware that someone had eyes on him the entire time. Carter crushed one of the devices under her boot, then turned to him, her face unreadable. "This isn't just Moretti being cautious. This is active surveillance, which means they're still watching you." Jake's pulse pounded. "And if they don't like what they hear," he asked, his voice hollow. Carter's expression darkened. "Then they make sure you don't talk." A chill ran down Jake's spine. "Jake," she said, her voice quieter now, more urgent. "We need to find whatever Henry left behind, and we need to do it fast." Jake took a shaky breath. Then he nodded. "Let's find it." Jake Miller had changed. The person who had once been desperate to survive, who had struggled through sleepless nights and cold mornings, now stood at the threshold of a new life. But it wasn't just the house or the money that had transformed him. It was the fire in his chest. The fire that burned for justice, for truth, for something deeper than just the fleeting victories he had once dreamed of. His motivation had evolved from simply surviving to standing up for what was right. The pain of betrayal, the overwhelming sense of being violated, had turned into a burning desire to see those who threatened him and others like him fall. Moretti, the ruthless enforcer, and the Lancaster family had underestimated the strength of a man backed into a corner. They thought they could crush him. They thought they could hide their crimes. But now they were about to face the consequences of their actions. Standing by his side in this final moment was Carter, the FBI agent who had been his reluctant ally throughout the storm. Though she was cautious, calculating, and always one step ahead, her respect for Jake had grown. She was no longer just the professional agent doing her job. She was someone who understood what it meant to fight for something bigger than oneself. Jake had also received a letter from his sister, Lily, earlier that morning. She had been worried, but now she understood why he had to do what he did. She supported him, even if she didn't fully grasp all the intricacies. Still, her unwavering belief in him gave him the strength to push forward. The final showdown came at a press conference. The tension in the room was suffocating, the air thick with anticipation. Henry Lancaster's will had been a bombshell, but it was the truth hidden beneath the surface that had led to this moment. Jake had spent the past week working with Carter and the FBI to uncover the full extent of Moretti's operation and the web of corruption that stretched far beyond just the old man's inheritance. With the press watching, Jake stood at the center of it all, the calm face of the storm. As he stepped forward, he caught sight of Charles Lancaster sitting in the front row, his smug expression faltering just a bit. He was unaware that this would be his undoing. "Mr. Lancaster," Jake began, his voice clear and steady, "I know what you've been hiding. I know about the money laundering, the backdoor deals, and the dirty businesses you and your family have been involved in for years." The room fell silent, cameras snapping to attention. Charles's eyes widened. "You don't know what you're talking about," he stammered, but there was a tremor in his voice now. "Fear?" "I do," Jake replied. "And now everyone will know." Jake stepped back and nodded at Carter. The FBI agents entered, pushing forward a stack of documents and encrypted files, all revealing the extent of the Lancaster family's illegal activities. In a calculated move, Jake had set a trap. Charles had made a fatal mistake in underestimating him. He had believed that Jake was just a pawn in his twisted game, a puppet to be discarded. But Jake had known better. He had saved everything, every email, every text, every document that Charles had believed would never see the light of day. Everything you've done, Jake continued, will now be exposed to the world. Your empire, built on lies and betrayal, is about to crumble. The journalist erupted in a frenzy, asking questions, recording every word. Charles's face was pale now, his mouth opening and closing without sound. His empire was shattering, and with it, the last of his power. The media coverage was swift. Within hours, the FBI had seized Charles Lancaster's assets, unraveling his financial empire. The dirty money was traced, laundered, and traced again, tying him to criminal syndicates across the globe. And in the midst of it all, Moretti's name was linked to every corrupt deal, every shady transaction. The FBI had gathered enough evidence to put both Charles and Moretti behind bars for a long time. The people they had manipulated and hurt, businesses ruined, lives destroyed, would finally have their justice. Jake stood in front of the new house, the one Henry Lancaster had left him. The weight of it all had started to sink in. The money, the property, the vengeance. It felt like a strange kind of closure, but he didn't feel victorious in the way he had imagined. He felt empty. He had gained everything he had ever wanted in terms of financial security, but it hadn't come without a price. He looked out over the lawn, taking a deep breath, and for the first time, felt the burden of what he had done. Lily had moved in with him. She was getting her life back on track, and Jake was proud of her. She had always been his anchor, the person who reminded him of what truly mattered: family. They spent evenings together, talking about what had happened and what the future would look like. The city had shifted too. The scandal rocked Chicago's elite, and the ripple effects of Charles's fall from grace spread far and wide. The Lancaster name would never be the same again, and those who had blindly followed him were left picking up the pieces of their shattered reputations. Carter had moved on as well. Her career had taken off after the case, and while she'd never admit it, Jake knew she had taken a personal stake in his success. Their relationship had transformed, but not into something romantic. Instead, there was a quiet understanding between them, a bond forged in the fire of this shared struggle. She had been there when he needed her most, and for that, he would never forget her. As Jake closed the door to his new home that evening, he glanced at the framed letter from Henry Lancaster that still sat on the mantel. It had been the catalyst for everything: his unexpected fortune, the battle for justice, and now, the beginning of a new chapter. A soft knock on the door interrupted his thoughts. He opened it to find Marcus, his old friend, standing there, hands in his pockets. There was something different in his eyes: respect, maybe even a little awe. "You did it, man," Marcus said, his voice rough. "You actually did it." Jake nodded, a small smile playing at the corner of his mouth. "Yeah, I guess I did." As Marcus stepped inside, Jake caught a glimpse of the city skyline in the distance. It had always been a place of struggle for him, but now it felt like a city of possibilities. "By the way," Marcus added with a grin, "Charles tried calling you. I think he wants his old life back." Jake smirked. "Tell him I'm too busy. He can keep his empire." As Marcus laughed, Jake closed the door behind him. It was time to move forward, to leave behind the ghosts of the past. But one last thought lingered in his mind. The lesson Henry had taught him, even in death. Sometimes, Jake whispered to himself, you have to lose everything to finally find who you really are. And with that, he walked away from the past, ready for whatever the future had in store.